Provisioning Office 365 tenants. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to look at how we can set up our tenancy or our account inside of Office 365. Once we've done that, I'll show you how easy it is to manage your subscriptions, your licenses, and even look at some of the different administrator roles that the users inside of your organization can take on in Office. So first things first, let's set up our Office 365 tenancy. Our tenant inside of Office 365 is going to represent, well, sort of like our subscription or our account for our entire company that we're going to manage our entire organization through. The reason we don't call it a subscription or an account is because, as you'll see in a few minutes, those phrases have very particular meanings inside of Office 365. So they had to come up with a better name for it, and actually I think tenant makes quite a bit of sense if you think about it. Setting up a tenancy is sort of like moving into an apartment complex, the Office 365 data center apartment complex. Yeah, you're going to be there with all of your stuff, all of your data, but you're only going to have access to and management over your little apartment, your one little piece of that apartment complex. Everyone else who's also using Office 365 is going to be there as well with control over their little piece of it, and you're all going to share the baseline infrastructure that's underneath. So you are like a tenant in the Office 365 data center. Setting it up is really easy to do. We're going to walk through all of that in a few minutes. First of all, understand that you are creating the management center for your entire organization. So if you're just playing around just to follow along, you can kind of set up and do whatever you want to do with it. But if you have any plans to move this or migrate this to your production Office 365 tenancy for your organization, keep that in mind when you're setting up things like your tenant name and the backup email address because, well, obviously you don't want to give it a goofy name if it's going to be official for your company. The tenant name is really, really important, first of all. You're going to get a DNS name that is .onmicrosoft.com with your tenant name up front. So your tenant name has got to be a DNS friendly. It can't have all the crazy characters that aren't allowed in DNS. And it's got to be unique, globally unique. So think about what you want your tenant name to be. Set that up appropriately. Once you've set up your tenant, all of your subscriptions and licenses and user accounts will be managed through this tenant. So the user accounts that are set up to be the administrator for this information will log into the admin panel for this tenant, and that's where they will manage all the subscriptions and licenses and users. In order to set this up, you are going to need an external email address and an SMS device, like a cell phone that they can text you at. So this is part of their multi-factor authentication scheme. They want to make sure that you have a valid backup email address since, yeah, you can set up email addresses inside of Office 365. You're not going to set those up in order to back up the account if you somehow lose access to the admin account. Same thing with your SMS device. It's a way that they can get in contact with you or validate your identity outside of Office 365. Probably just your cell phone, although again, if you're going to set this up as a corporate account for your organization, maybe think about a corporate cell phone. And then lastly, when you are setting it up, you are going to have to purchase an initial subscription. But you're not going to be limited to that. Later on during the process, once it's set up, you can go to the admin panel, and I'll show you how to do this. You can purchase additional subscriptions of different licenses to be assigned to your users. So why don't we open up the Office 365 interface and set up our new tenant now. I'm going to access that from products.office.com. This is the website where we can sign up for a new account. Now, if you already have an Office 365 account, notice that you may be already signed into it over here on the right-hand side. In order to avoid that happening, at least for me, I've opened up an incognito browser window. You can do the same or just sign out of that account if you're comfortable signing out of that account in order to set up a new one. From here, we'll choose what type of account we want. We could use either home accounts for individual users or, as in our case, business accounts for business users. It's going to list a couple of, or rather we have to choose then see plans and pricing. They make you click through a lot of screens here. I don't know why. It's going to list a couple of very common business accounts or business subscriptions that you might choose. This is that initial subscription that I just talked about. This is what we're going to set up our account with initially. What we want to use for the purposes of this nugget is actually the Enterprise E3 account, which I'm going to select up here at the top. This is a fairly robust account. You can see it's $20 per user per month. If you want to set up with just a free trial or with a cheaper version of an account to follow along, you can do that, but in order to cover all the features that we want to cover inside of this series, we are going to want an Enterprise E3 account. We simply select Buy Now, and that's going to launch the tenancy setup system here. There's a couple of different things that we need to set up inside of our tenant, and these are really important, so let's talk through them one by one. First of all, you've got to choose a region, and notice that it cannot be changed after sign up. The region is going to indicate to Office 365 different things like what your taxes should be for billing purposes, where your data is going to get stored, which can impact regulatory questions. So it's really important that you choose the right region for your business. If we pull this down here, you can see all the different regions that are available. Most of the time, this is going to default to one of the select few Office 365 data centers around the world. We're going to leave it at United States for us, but they do have data centers in places like Canada, Brazil, all across Europe, Asia. There's even a new one in Australia. So there are different data centers that you can end up in. It's important to know where you want your region to be. You want to indicate a name and your business backup email address. So once again, this is not going to be the email address that will be used inside of Office 365. You're going to have an email address there. This is going to be the backup email address. Finally, you can choose your organization size to give them a sense of how many licenses and how many subscriptions you might end up needing when you purchase this. Fill out my work address very quickly here. The next thing you'll need to do is create a user ID for your very first account. Now we'll talk about administrator accounts in a moment, but this account is going to be the first global administrator over the entire tenancy. That means that they will have access to do anything and everything inside of the system. The next item here, although it doesn't really indicate it, it says your company. Notice it's .onmicrosoft.com. That means that this is going to be your tenant name right here. Here's where we fill in that tenant name that I was just talking about. So make sure it is informative and useful, and make sure that it is unique. I'll go with bfinkel0365. And then lastly, you need to create a secure password for this account. In order to prove that you're not a robot, you're going to set up a phone number to be texted at so that you can get a text message, which will include a code, and you're going to key that code back in on the very next page here in order to validate that yes, you are not in fact a robot.
So I will key in the code that they sent me, and it will verify that I'm not a robot.
Finally, you can review the terms of what you chose. I chose an Office 365 Enterprise E3 account at $20 per month for one user. If I wanted to set up a whole bunch of users right now, I could do that, and you can see it would update the total that it's going to charge me. Click Next, and we'll key in our payment information, and then our account will be created for us. Once they've validated your payment, you get a little confirmation page here with your details that you've just set up. Notice my sign-in page is now portal.office.com. For the remainder of this Nugget series, that's how we'll access our administrator panel for Office 365. And my user ID indicating my first user, the global administrator on this tenancy, as well as my tenant name, benfinkel0365.onmicrosoft.com. It's already been set up with that domain name automatically for me. That's all going to work right out of the box. I can click Let's Get Started to, well, get started. The one thing that I want to show you here from the Office.com interface is this little pip up here in the upper left. This is important because when you pull this out, it's going to show you all the different features and functions that you have access to in Office 365. For our purposes, the majority of the time, we're going to be really interested in the admin option here. That is going to get us access to the admin panel where we can do all of our management work inside of the Office 365 tenant. So I'll click Admin, and you can see it's going to bring up the admin panel here. We're going to cover a lot of these different features and functions throughout this Nugget series. Let's just go over a few of them right now. The first thing we'll take a look at here is the users over on the left-hand side. If you pull that down and select Active Users, we can see that, well, currently we have one user. That's the global administrator that we just set up when we created this account. If I select that user, I can actually see those details, including product licenses here. Notice I have an Office 365 Enterprise E3 license. That's a subscription that I purchased, and that is the license that's been associated with this user. And I've also got my roles, my global administrator roles. Now there is an edit button here, but the first thing you'll notice is that you can't edit your own security settings. Makes sense, right? I can't elevate myself to a higher security setting. So I need to create a second user, and that's actually probably the very first thing that you ought to do when you set up a new Office 365 tenancy. You ought to create a second global administrator user, because that way you have multiple accounts, multiple user accounts with the global administrator right when you need to get in and access the system with that right. You don't want to have just one account and lose the password or have that individual leave the organization. So you simply click the plus new user button. It's really easy to do. One of the things I want to point out when I scroll down here is that I have the product licenses. It's already picking up the Office 365 Enterprise E3 license for me, and I bought a second copy of this license, so I do have a available license for this user. But if you want to, you can actually just turn this off and you can create a user without a product license. Now, there's not a lot of great reasons to do that, but if you just want to start creating users and not assigning licenses to them yet, you can do that. You can just turn this flag on to say create user without license, and then you can assign the license later. The other thing I want to point out here is the role. It's going to start off with a simple basic user role that has no admin access, but we have the option to give them global administrator, which is what I want to do, or customized administrator, which enables any of these additional administrators for your system. Now, just to run down a couple of the important ones, billing administrator, just like it sounds like, is an administrator account that can handle all of the billing materials for you. So they can't necessarily be assigning licenses or doing other global administrator tasks, but they can handle paying the bill, which is very, very important. Another important one, password administrator, like it sounds like, allows them to reset and change users' passwords. So when people lose their passwords, a password administrator can come in and reset those passwords. Now, there are a few restrictions. Password administrators cannot change the password for people who have been assigned to global administrator, service administrator, or billing administrator. So they can change passwords mostly for basic users as well as other password administrators, but not for the high-level admin accounts. The service administrator type here allows the user to sign in and manage and monitor service requests and service health. So you can have administrators who are in charge of monitoring the system itself. Think low-level help desk support engineers. And then lastly, the user management administrator allows the user to, well, like it sounds like, manage users, create and delete users, as well as all the functions, the roles of the password administrator are also rolled up in that user administrator role. So when you have a larger organization with a lot of people, it's going to make sense to separate out your users into these different admin roles as needed. For this nugget here, I'm just going to make a second global administrator, click the add button, and it's going to add Jane Doe right into my users. You'll notice when I'm done that I have the option to email the password either to myself or to her if she has another backup email address, and that'll tell her how she can log in. Once she does that, she'll be able to change her password to something more intelligent and more reasonable for her. I'll just click send email and close. It's going to send it right to my Ben Finkel user. And now both users are listed, and notice the status is unlicensed for Jane Doe. At this point, I can come in here and I have product licenses. I can click edit, and I can assign her a product license. I've got one license available in my Office 365 Enterprise E3. I can simply click that, and now she's assigned to it once I click the save button there. If I have additional subscriptions with additional licenses, I would see them listed down here as well, and I could choose to assign one of those licenses to her instead. Note that a user can only have one license assigned to him at any point in time. So it's going to make sense to only buy the specific number of licenses that you need and ensure that they have the specific rights that your users are going to need to do their job on a day-to-day basis. Another really important section here is the billing section on the left. When I select the billing section, notice the different subheadings here: subscriptions, bills, licenses. When I select subscriptions, I can see all of these subscriptions that I have associated with this tenant. So of course there is the Office Enterprise E3 account that I set up when I created this, but I can absolutely add a new subscription with additional licenses for different tier of service, a different level of service. So that's how you can create those licenses and get those licenses available inside of your tenant to be assigned to users like I just showed you a moment ago. That's right down here. That actually jumped me down to the purchase services option on the left. There's also really useful macro information about your service here. It tells you what payment method is currently being used. It tells you your total balance when you're going to get charged for all of this. You can see how many you've purchased and how many you've assigned, how many of the licenses you're using up from what you've assigned. You can jump to the add remove licenses page. You can assign to users from a big central planning page. One really important piece that I like a lot right here is the auto renew feature. If you've got your subscription right now, if you're following along, you've got it attached to your own personal bank account, your own personal credit card, turn off auto renew, right? You don't want to get dinged every month for this. Chances are you'll be done with this at the end of the month. And even if you want to renew at the end of the month, you can simply come in here and click the button to renew specifically for you. On the flip side, if you're running this for your organization, for your company, you don't want all of your users to suddenly be denied access at the end of the month, so you want to leave auto renew on so that those charges continue to accrue each month and you don't have to worry about your users losing service. One final point, you may have heard that you can't change your payment method for your subscriptions through the portal, but that's no longer true. A rather new feature inside of the portal is this change payment details option right here, and yeah, you can go in and change how you're paying for the subscription. So that may come up in the documentation that you've read that you're not allowed to change this. Well, that was true in the past, but it's no longer true. So that concludes this nugget on provisioning your Office 365 tenant. Just to recap, setting up a tenant means setting up a subscription for our entire organization, an account for our entire organization in Office 365 that we will then use to administer access to Office 365 for all of the users in our company. We initially have one global administrator user that we want to add an additional user to in order to create some redundancy inside of our Office tenancy. And we have the ability to set up users, assign subscriptions or licenses from subscriptions, purchase new subscriptions, and even set up different administrator types of users. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.